One of the most central pieces of any build order in Civ 6 is governors. This is even more true when playing with the Better Balanced Game mod, which is used everywhere in competitive multiplayer Civ 6. While this mod dishes out a few nerfs to some governors, it largely buffs governors as a whole, making it more important than ever to spend our governor titles wisely. While I've covered this topic in a previous video, it's since been made obsolete by recent updates to the Better Balanced Game mod, which overhauled several of the governors, so we'll be going over this topic again from scratch. In the modern version of BBG, we have more options and flexibility than ever when it comes to deciding where we'll be spending our governor titles, so strap in. The first thing to understand about governors is the pace at which we earn governor titles. Generally, we'll be getting 3 gov titles early on, one at the early Empire Civic, another at State Workforce, and a third for completing construction of the government plaza. Then, assuming we go for a classic rush for the Feudalism Civic, we'll get 2 more governor titles. One from completing the Defensive Tactics Civic, and another from the first building we construct in the Government Plaza. Henceforth, I'll be referring to these 5 governor titles as the early game gov titles. Our main priority when spending these will be ensuring we have enough food, production, and culture to meet our early game needs. Another thing to account for before we actually move on to discussing the governors themselves is the audience chamber. This building can be constructed in the Government Plaza and has been buffed by the Better Balanced Game mod, granting 3 food, 3 housing, and 1 amenity to every city which has a governor assigned to it. On spawns with very low natural food yields, one way of leveraging governor titles is to simply construct this building and then spread out our governor titles to get as much food as possible. Governors that have strong inherent bonuses, such as Magnus and Liang, are particularly useful for this, as we don't need to spend any additional governor titles on promotions to get good value. Lastly, the governors that we choose to prioritize will vary based on the specific civ we're playing and the build order we're going for. Generally, every civ can be grouped into one of 3 categories: a religious opening with the Monumentality Golden Age dedication, a trade district opening focusing on commercial hubs or harbors with the Pen, Brush, and Voice Golden Age dedication, or a unique civ-specific opening, such as Gaul's Opium Opener or Maya's Observatory Opener. Which governors we'll want in the early game largely depends on their specific synergies with whichever opening strategy we've elected to go for. With all of that out of the way, we can finally move on to actually examining the governors themselves. The first one we'll be looking at is Amani, the diplomat. The most notable aspect of Amani is that she can be assigned to a city-state, where she'll act as 2 envoys and grant +2 food and production on all trade routes sent to her city. This allows us to quickly become suzerain of any city-state with which we already have 1 envoy. Even though we don't want to spend our early game governor titles on Amani in most games, there are some city-states which are powerful enough for us to make an exception. Generally, we're looking for strong bonuses to early game production or culture. Ayutthaya, Johannesburg, and Zanzibar are strong enough city-states to justify going for Amani as our first governor. An added benefit of using Amani to become suzerain of a city-state early on is that it grants us 2 additional era score, which can sometimes be necessary to achieve our first golden age. While the yields Amani adds to trade routes sent to her city-state may seem very powerful, they're actually not very impressive on their own. This is because trade routes to city-states have a pitifully low 3 gold yield as a baseline, so even with Amani assigned to a city-state, we can easily outperform our trade route yields simply by trading internally to our own capital city, which has a government plaza and 1 other district. However, there are some circumstances under which sending our trade routes to Amani can really shine. For instance, the city-states of Singapore and Kumasi both grant extra yields on international trade routes, making them excellent targets for sending traders. Furthermore, some leaders such as Wilhelmina and Kublai Khan gain extra yields on international trade routes, which incentivizes trading to city-states with Amani rather than sending trade routes internally. In these cases, opening with Amani as our first governor and trading to our city is a viable strategy. Generally speaking, we won't ever be spending additional titles to promote Amani until much later into the game. Her most notable promotions are Affluence, which provides 2 of every strategic resource and can be useful for generating oil, aluminum, and uranium, and Puppeteer, which doubles the number of envoys we have in our city-state. Moving on to the next governor in line, we have Victor. The main purpose this governor serves is defense, as he can be assigned to a city to greatly raise its garrison strength, and his promotions can be taken to grant your units in the city extra combat strength. Ideally, we won't ever have to use him for this purpose, but it's important to keep in mind. However, Victor isn't just for defense. In some cases, the promotion of his, which grants all units trained in a city a free promotion, can be very valuable. This is most notable for training spies, which can be difficult to promote otherwise, and for training naval units, as their first level promotions are the most impactful of any unit class. A well-known strategy is to train our first spy in the city with Victor to earn a free promotion, then rush the Terracotta Army Wonder to get a second promotion on that spy immediately afterwards. With 2 promotions, spies will grant 2 levels of diplomatic visibility instead of 1 when running the listening post mission, which translates into additional combat strength on all units in warfare. However, as this strategy requires spending 3 whole governor titles on Victor and securing the Terracotta Army, the payoff is only really worth it when playing as Mongolia, which gains +6 combat strength per level of Diplo-Vis advantage it has over the opponent, instead of the typical +3. In the vast majority of our games, we don't ever want to bother with this governor at all. Moving on to a generally much more useful governor, we'll be examining Moksha. This guy has had quite the glow up in BBG compared to the unmodded game, going from a niche option to one of the premier early game governors. Notably, Moksha is the go-to first governor whenever we're playing for a religious opening. This is not only because Moksha grants extra faith and religious pressure, but also because he grants some ever-important culture from his left side promotion, which grants +1 culture per citizen in his city. This is particularly useful when we're running the Monumentality Golden Age dedication, as we won't be able to rely on pen, brush, and voice for our early game culture needs, the way that a non-religious Civ build order can. Going for an early level 2 Moksha isn't just for the religious civs, however. It's common to spend our first 3 governor titles on other things, and then return to spend our 4th and 5th governor titles assigning and promoting Moksha in our second city, just for the extra culture he grants, so that we can reach the ever-important feudalism civic quickly. Moksha's other promotions have their merits, too. The second left side promotion, which grants extra culture and food on internal trade routes sent to a city, can be very valuable on civs that go for internal trade routes and have particularly strong power spikes in the civics tree. For instance, Maori can go for a harbor opener and use Moksha to rush for their mercantilism and conservation civics as quickly as possible for the extra production they grant on unimproved tiles. And Germany can go for a commercial hub opener and leverage Moksha to get to the guild civic ASAP for the extra district slot they gain, as well as for the craftsman policy card that doubles industrial zone adjacency. Lastly, Moksha can play a pivotal role in achieving culture victory in the late game, as we can use his final promotion to double the tourism generated from great works in his city. The value from this can be maximized by storing as many great works as possible in his city, building things like Apadana, National History Museum, and Hermitage for more great work slots. The other promotions Moksha has can honestly be safely ignored for the most part. The next governor on our list is the ever-important Magnus. While he was once the greatest governor this game has ever seen, he's been heavily nerfed by more recent patches to the Better Balanced Game mod, and is now a shadow of his former glory. Don't be mistaken, however, Magnus still has his place in the current meta. The most common way to leverage Magnus is to assign him to our capital and take his left side promotion for extra yields on internal trade routes, and then build the government plaza in the same city for even more extra yields on internals, and then send all of our traders there. This grants a great deal of food and production to all of our cities, and is one of the simplest ways to meet our early game needs. A common dilemma in the current meta is whether or not to go for Moksha internals or Magnus internals with our early game trade routes. In most cases, the decision of which one to go for will come down to the amount of value we can get out of Magnus's inherent effect. You see, this governor grants 40% extra yields to all feature and resource harvests performed in his city. Capital cities with a large number of choppable woods and resources benefit immensely from Magnus, especially if we go for the Ancestral Hall in our government plaza. The 50% extra production towards settlers stacks multiplicatively with the 40% extra yields from chopping woods in Magnus's city, allowing us to spam settlers out of our capital like nothing else. If you're feeling particularly good about spamming settlers out of the capital, you can even consider going for the promotion which causes settlers trained in Magnus's city to not consume population, although this is something that I don't do very often nowadays. In order to get good value out of this promotion, you need to be able to justify making at least 3 more settlers from your capital city after earning the promotion, which is rarely the best strategy. Magnus can also be promoted later in the game to get our hands on vertical integration, which allows the city to benefit from the production yield of all area of effect buildings in its radius instead of just the first one. This is commonly used to stack the production bonuses of many factories and oil/nuclear power plants into a single city to complete the space projects as quickly as possible and achieve a science victory. Outside of these uses, there's one final, simple way of using Magnus: spending a single governor title on him, dumping him in our second or third city, and using him purely for the extra yields he provides on chopping. This is common on religious civs and on any civ that wants to take advantage of the extra food granted by the audience chamber, as Magnus's inherent effect is perhaps the best of any unpromoted governor. Next up, we have the most complicated of the governors in the Better Balanced Game mod, Liang. This governor is practically 3 governors in one, as the way we choose to promote her dramatically changes the optimal way to use her. We will treat each of these 3 modes of Liang as separate options and evaluate them accordingly. The first way to use Liang is for her promotions that grant extra yields on resources. It's possible to take Liang as our very first governor and take her promotions for extra food and production on resources in her city right away. This is particularly useful on civs that have unique build orders outside of the typical religious/trade district dichotomy, such as Maya or Gaul. To justify resource Liang, however, we need to make sure we actually have a large number of strong, workable resource tiles in our capital, at least 7 in my opinion. This opening will result in our capital becoming extremely large and productive very quickly. One of the best ways to leverage this is to go for an entertainment complex at 7 population and rush for the Colosseum, which is the best wonder in the game. With our city being as massive as it is, it's unlikely that other civs will be able to beat us in a race for this wonder. The second way of using Liang is for her first left side promotion, which grants +1 production on floodplains and volcanic soil in her city, as well as preventing tile improvements from being destroyed by natural disasters. The combination of Liang, the Lady of the Reeds and Marshes pantheon, and the Etymonaki wonder is a classic way of achieving an extremely large, powerful city in the early game. In any scenario where we're considering going for Etymonaki, we should strongly consider putting Liang in that city for the extra production on floodplains. Alternatively, this form of Liang can be used to take advantage of any of the volcano natural wonders that are predisposed to frequent eruptions, such as Mount Kilimanjaro. Not only will we get extra production on volcanic soil, we will also be able to avoid having our mines removed whenever the volcano erupts. The third and final way of using Liang is for her city parks promotion. This promotion requires us to spend 3 whole titles on Liang, and to get the most value out of it, we only ever want to consider going for this early on. The way that we leverage this promotion is simple. We assign Liang to a city, build a city park in it, and then move her on to the next city in line and repeat. The goal is to have a city park in nearly every city in our empire. Not only do these grant respectable yields, they also provide +2 housing and +1 amenity to the city they're built in. The main problem with this strategy, however, is that it requires us to spend 3 of our first 5 governor titles on Liang, and we won't really get to feel the benefits of those titles until much later once we've moved her around enough to have built multiple city parks. Furthermore, constantly moving Liang around like this has strong anti-synergy with the audience chamber building, as it won't provide any food or housing from governors that aren't fully established. As such, we should only ever consider going for City Parks Liang if we're going for the Ancestral Hall or Warlord's Throne in our government plaza, and only if we can spare to spend 3 governor titles on Liang instead of somewhere else. The next governor we'll be looking at is Pingala. While unambiguously one of the best governors in the game when playing without the better balanced game mod, he's a bit more complex when playing with the mod, being reworked entirely into a science focus. Generally, we rarely want to be spending our governor titles in Pingala very early in the game. Science simply doesn't have as much value in the early game as stats like food, production, and culture. However, in the mid game, Pingala becomes one of the best options for dumping our governor titles, as we can assign him to one of our larger cities and take his promotion for +1 science per citizen in the city. Another way of using Pingala is for his grants promotion, which doubles great person points generated in his city. This has fantastic synergy with the Oracle, which provides 2 great person points per district constructed in the city it resides in. Whenever we go for the Oracle, we also strongly want to consider assigning Pingala to that city with the grants promotion to double its value. While Pingala also has his own promotion for increasing the yields on internal trade routes, granting +3 science on each trader sent to his city, it suffers from the fact that science isn't a particularly useful yield in the early game. Furthermore, internal trade routes fall off compared to international trade routes later in the game, so pivoting into Pingala internals later on doesn't make much sense either. The only civs that really get good value out of Pingala's internal trade route promotion are the ones that want to run internal trade routes all game, like Tokugawa or the Persian leaders. Otherwise, you can steer clear of this promotion. Last but not least, we'll be examining the governor Reyna. The better balanced game mod has been very kind to this governor in recent days, granting her bonuses that make her one of the most coveted late game governors. Typically, we won't be spending any of our early game gov titles on her, the one exception to this being the rare preserve opening, where the extra appeal in gold she grants with her right side promotion can really shine. In most cases, we'll be taking Reyna with some of our later governor titles and taking her left side promotion. Not only does this double commercial hub and harbor adjacency in her city, it also causes her to grant an additional trade route capacity if the city is both a market and a lighthouse, creating the only scenario where it's acceptable to build both trading districts in the same city. Not only will this grant a great deal of gold, this promotion also has fantastic synergy with the free Inquiry Golden Age dedication, which provides science equal to our total harbor and commercial hub adjacency. Afterwards, we can grab her middle promotion for another extra trade route capacity and some gold, and then go for our final right side promotion for some extra yields from international trade routes passing through her city. It's important to note that this only grants yields for traders sent by other civs that pass through our city, and won't work with traders of our own. In some cases, we can get upwards of 30 culture and science per turn from this one promotion in the late game, and sometimes I've even found myself moving Reyna into my capital city in order to maximize the amount of science and culture she provides. Positioning Reyna for this promotion is critical. You always want her to be in your city that has the most foreign trade routes passing through. That just about wraps up the most common use cases for each governor in multiplayer Civ 6 with the better balanced game mod. If you want to see more guides like this, be sure to subscribe and check out my BBG guide playlist, which covers everything you need to know if you ever want to dip your toes into Civ 6 multiplayer. You can also follow me on Twitch to see full games of Civ 6 live, and subscribe to me on Patreon if you want to support the channel. That's all for now. Herson signing out.